Everyone knows Michael Jordan as the greatest basketball player of all time. 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, a global icon worth billions. But what if everything you thought you knew about his legendary drive was built on a secret he's kept for 45 years? In November 2023, Michael Jordan's sister Rosalynn made a phone call that would change everything. She was ready to expose a story her brother never wanted told. A story about a promise, a tragedy, and a boy named Jimmy Parker that the world had forgotten. This isn't a story about basketball greatness. It's about the debt Michael has been quietly paying since 1979. It's about $8 million donated in complete secrecy. It's about survivor's guilt that fueled 6 championships. And it's about a letter written by an 18-year-old boy days before his death. A letter Michael has read thousands of times but never shown to anyone outside his family. Until now. The truth is finally coming out. And it starts with a rainy afternoon in Charlotte, when Rosalynn Jordan decided her brother had carried this burden long enough. The rain hammered against the windows of the small brick house on Beatty's Ford Road in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rosalynn Jordan sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window that overlooked her garden, now gray and dripping in the November afternoon. Around her, covering every surface of the living room, were photographs. Some in frames, others loose in shoe boxes she'd pulled from the closet that morning. There was Michael at 10, skinny and gap-toothed. Michael at 15 holding a basketball. Yeah, Michael in his North Carolina uniform, cutting down the nets. Michael with 6 NBA championship trophies, her little brother frozen in time across 5 decades. But the photograph in her hand showed someone else. A tall teenage boy with a wide smile standing next to a younger Michael on an outdoor basketball court. The photo was faded, the colors washed to pale blues and yellows. Summer 1977. Most people had never seen this picture. Most people didn't know this boy existed. Rosalynn's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She was 68 years old and tired of phone calls from strangers asking about Michael. Reporters, authors, documentary filmmakers, everyone wanted a piece of her famous brother. But something made her pick up. Miss Jordan, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm a journalist with the Charlotte Observer. The voice was young, earnest, polite. I'm working on a story and I need your help. Rosalynn sighed. Mr. Webb, I don't do interviews about my brother. I'm sure you understand. This isn't about basketball, Marcus said quickly. It's about a donation, an anonymous donation made to a community center in Chicago in 1984. I've been investigating it for 2 years. Rosalynn's hand tightened on the phone. Her heart began to race. I don't know what you're talking about. The Englewood Youth Center, Marcus continued. Someone has been donating money to this place for almost 40 years. Millions of dollars, always anonymous, always through a law firm in Chicago. I traced it to a trust called the James Parker Memorial Fund. The name hit Rosalynn like a physical blow. James Parker. Jimmy. The boy in the photograph she was holding. The boy Michael never talked about. Like the secret they'd kept for 45 years. Miss Jordan, are you still there? Rosalynn's voice came out as a whisper. How did you find out about Jimmy? There was a pause on the other end. Marcus spoke carefully. So it's true, Michael Jordan started that fund. And it was named after someone named James Parker. Rosalynn closed her eyes. The secret was out. Or at least part of it was. Mr. Webb, what exactly do you know? Not enough, Marcus admitted. I know the fund exists. I know it's helped thousands of kids in Chicago. I know your brother has never spoken about it publicly, but I don't know why. I don't know who James Parker was, and I don't know why this has been kept secret for so long. Rosalynn looked at the photograph again. Jimmy's smile. Michael's young face full of hope and determination, and 2 boys on a basketball court in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a summer that felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago. If I tell you this story, Rosalynn said slowly, you have to promise me something. You have to tell the whole truth, the painful parts too. No Hollywood ending, no sugarcoating. Jimmy deserves that much. I promise, Marcus said. And you have to use his name, James Parker. Jimmy. People need to know he existed. Of course. Rosalind took a deep breath. Rain continued to beat against the window. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She thought about Michael, about the burden he'd carried alone for so long. She thought about Jimmy, forever 18, forever forgotten by everyone except the people who loved him. There's a story Michael never wanted anyone to know, Rosalind said, and it involves someone he couldn't save. Who was Jimmy Parker? Marcus asked softly. He was my brother's best friend. He was the reason Michael became who he is. And he died in 1979 when Michael was just 15 years old. Rosalind's voice cracked. What happened after that? What Michael did? It's the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. But Michael never wanted credit. He never wanted attention. He just wanted to keep a promise. A promise to Jimmy? Yes. A promise that cost him millions of dollars and 40 years of his life. Rosalind wiped her eyes. Mr. Webb, can you meet me tomorrow? I'll tell you everything. But this can't be just another Michael Jordan story. This has to be about Jimmy. About what Michael's been hiding. About why some secrets need to be told. I'll be there, Marcus said. Thank you. Ms. Jordan. After she hung up, Rosalind sat holding the photograph. She whispered to the image of the smiling teenage boy. I'm sorry, Jimmy, but the world needs to know your name. They need to know what you meant to him. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the streets of Charlotte clean. The rain in Charlotte reminded Rosalind of another rain, 46 years ago in Wilmington. The summer of 1977 had been hot and sticky, but when the thunderstorms came, they came hard and fast, turning the red clay streets into rivers. Marcus Webb arrived at Rosalind's house at 10 o'clock the next morning. The rain had stopped, leaving everything fresh and dripping. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and a worn leather notebook tucked under his arm. They sat at her kitchen table. Rosalind made coffee, and she needed to start at the beginning, before the tragedy, when everything was still possible. Michael was 14 in the summer of 1977, Rosalind began. He was the youngest of us 5 kids, Dolores, Larry, me, Michael, and James Jr. We lived on Gordon Road in Wilmington. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Marcus wrote in his notebook, listening carefully. That summer, Michael was miserable, Rosalind continued. He was short, maybe 5'6", skinny as a rail. Larry was the athlete in our family. Larry was strong, coordinated, confident. Michael lived in his shadow. He wanted to play basketball so badly, but he couldn't make a layup to save his life. She smiled at the memory. Our mother worried about him. He'd come home from the outdoor courts angry, frustrated, sometimes crying. Other boys made fun of him, called him names, said he was too small, too weak, too clumsy. That must have been hard, Marcus said. It was. But then Jimmy Parker moved onto our street. Rosalind's voice softened. 3 houses down, number 417. He came to live with his grandmother, Mrs. Lucille Parker. Jimmy was 16, already 6 feet tall, and he was the best basketball player at Laney High School. Rosalind stood and walked to a drawer. She pulled out more photographs, spreading them on the table. There was Jimmy, tall, lean, with an easy smile and gentle eyes. Jimmy's parents died in a car accident when he was 8, Rosalind explained. He'd been living with an aunt in Raleigh, but she got sick. So he came to Wilmington to live with his grandmother. Basketball was everything to him. It saved him from the grief, you know. I gave him something to hold on to. Marcus studied the photographs. How did he meet Michael? July 10th, 1977. I remember the exact date because it was my birthday. I was having a party in our backyard and Michael was supposed to be there. But he snuck off to the outdoor court at Robert Strange Park. That's on North 10th Street, about 6 blocks from our house. Rosalind poured more coffee, settling back into her chair. Michael went there to practice alone. He didn't want anyone seeing him miss shots. But Jimmy was already there, shooting around. Michael tried to leave, embarrassed, but Jimmy called out to him. She could still picture it. Her mother sending her to find Michael, finding him at the court with this tall stranger, both of them laughing, the ball bouncing between them. Jimmy said something to Michael that day that changed everything, Rosalind said. You're aiming with your arms. Basketball is played with your legs and your heart. That's what Jimmy told him. Then he spent the next 2 hours teaching Michael footwork, balance, how to follow through on a shot. Marcus looked up from his notes. Just like that? A stranger helping him? That was Jimmy, Rosalind said softly. He saw something in Michael. Maybe he saw himself, someone who needed basketball, who could use it to become something more. Or maybe Jimmy was just kind. Some people are born that way. She described how that summer unfolded. Every morning, Michael would wake up at 6 o'clock and meet Jimmy at the court. They'd practice for 3 hours before the heat became unbearable. Jimmy taught Michael everything: defensive slides, how to read a defender's hips, mental toughness when you're tired, the importance of practicing what you're worst at. Jimmy had this saying, Rosalind remembered, you don't get better by doing what's easy. You get better by doing what scares you. By August, Michael had grown an inch. More importantly, he'd transformed as a player. His shots started falling. His confidence grew. Other boys at the court stopped laughing. They started picking him for games. Jimmy and Michael became inseparable, Rosalind said. Jimmy would come over for dinner. Our mother loved him. He was respectful, polite, always said yes ma'am and no sir. He'd help with dishes without being asked. Mrs. Parker would come over too, and our mothers would sit on the porch drinking sweet tea while the boys played in our driveway. She showed Marcus another photograph. Michael and Jimmy sitting on the front steps of the Jordan house, both holding basketballs, both grinning at the camera. Late summer light, long shadows. Jimmy told Michael things he'd never told anyone else, Rosalind said. About his parents, about the accident, about the nightmares he still had, about how basketball saved him from becoming angry and bitter. Michael listened. He was young, but he understood loss. Our family didn't have much money. Daddy worked 2 jobs. We knew about struggle. Marcus asked, did Jimmy talk about his future? All the time. He wanted to play college basketball, maybe get a degree in education, become a teacher and coach, and he wanted to help kids the way basketball had helped him. Rosalind's eyes filled with tears. He had such good dreams. As September approached and school started, the friendship only deepened. Jimmy was a senior at Laney High. Michael was entering his sophomore year. They'd practice together after school, Jimmy pushing Michael harder, preparing him for varsity tryouts the following year. Jimmy made Michael believe in himself, Rosalind said. That's the thing people don't understand about Michael's success. Yes, he had talent. Yes, he worked hard. But Jimmy gave him something more important. The belief that he could become great. That he wasn't too small or too weak or too anything. That with work and heart, anything was possible. She paused, looking out the window at her rain-washed garden. That summer of 1977 was the happiest I ever saw Michael. He had a friend, a mentor, a brother who chose him. Jimmy chose to spend his time with a 14-year-old kid when he could have been doing anything else. That's what made it so special. Marcus closed his notebook. It sounds like Jimmy was an incredible person. He was, Rosalind whispered. And then we lost him. But before that happened, Michael had to face his first big test, and Jimmy was there for that too. She stood, gathering the photographs. The next part is hard to talk about. It's about failure and humiliation, and the moment that defined my brother's entire life. Everyone knows the story, but they don't know Jimmy's role in it. They don't know what happened after. Marcus waited, pen ready. Michael's sophomore year at Laney High School, Rosalind said. Fall 1978, the varsity tryouts that broke his heart, and the promise Jimmy made that would echo for 45 years. Marcus leaned forward as Rosalind opened another box of photographs. These were from 1978, Michael's sophomore year at Laney High School. The images showed a boy caught between childhood and something else, still growing, still awkward, but with fire in his eyes. October 1978, Roslyn began. Varsity basketball tryouts at Laney High. Michael had been practicing with Jimmy every single day for over a year. He was confident, we all were. Jimmy kept saying, "Mike's ready. Coach Herring is going to see what I see." She handed Marcus a photo of the Laney High Gymnasium, a modest building on Castle Street in Wilmington, still standing today. That's where it happened, where Michael's heart got broken. The tryouts lasted 3 days. Michael played well, better than he'd ever played. Jimmy, now a senior and team captain, watched every minute. He told Michael after each session, "You're doing great, keep going." On the third day, Coach Clifton Herring posted the roster on the locker room wall. 15 names. Michael Jordan's wasn't one of them. "I was at home when Michael came back," Roslyn said quietly. "I heard the front door slam. He ran straight to his room. Wouldn't talk to anyone. Mama tried to go in, but he'd locked the door. We could hear him crying." She paused, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. People know this story. Michael always talked about getting cut. He used it as motivation his whole career, but what people don't know is what happened next. What Jimmy did. Michael stayed in his room for 2 hours. When he finally came out, his eyes were red and swollen. He didn't say a word to his family. He just walked out the back door and disappeared. Roslyn followed him at a distance. She was worried about her little brother. She watched him walk the 6 blocks to Robert Strange Park, to the outdoor court where Jimmy had first taught him to play. It was getting dark, Roslyn remembered. Maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock. The streetlights were coming on. And there was Michael sitting on that court, his back against the chain-link fence, crying like his world had ended. Marcus asked, "Did you talk to him?" "I was about to. But then Jimmy showed up." Roslyn's voice grew soft. "I don't know how he knew Michael would be there. Maybe he just knew. He sat down next to Michael on that concrete court. Didn't say anything at first. I just sat there." She described what she witnessed, hiding behind the park's equipment shed, listening. Jimmy finally spoke. "I got cut too." Michael looked at him, confused. "What?" "Freshman year," Jimmy said. "Coach Davis cut me from the team. Said I was too skinny, too raw, not ready. I went home and told my grandmother I was done with basketball. She was still alive then. This was before she moved here to Wilmington. She sat me down and told me something I never forgot." Roslyn recited the words she'd heard that night. "Pain is just proof you care enough to be great. If getting cut doesn't hurt, then basketball doesn't matter to you. But if it hurts this much, then you've got something special inside. Don't waste it on quitting." Michael wiped his eyes. "But you're the best player at Laney." "Now I am," Jimmy said. "But I wasn't always. I practiced every single day for a year. Made the team sophomore year. Made varsity junior year. And now I'm captain. You know why? Because getting cut made me hungrier than everyone else." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jimmy said something that would change everything. "Mike, you're going to practice with me every single day this year. Every morning before school. Every afternoon after my practice ends. Weekends. I don't care if it rains or snows or the court is covered in ice. We're going to work." "Why would you do that?" Michael asked. "You've got your own season to worry about." Jimmy's answer was simple. "Because you've got something special. I see it. And I'm not going to let you waste it because one coach couldn't see it yet." Roslyn watched them shake hands on that court as darkness fell over Wilmington. A promise made between two boys who loved basketball more than anything. That's when everything changed, Roslyn told Marcus. Michael stopped feeling sorry for himself. He got angry. The good kind of angry. The kind that makes you work harder than everyone else. The next morning, at 5:30, Michael met Jimmy at the court. It was cold for October, maybe 50 degrees and still dark. Jimmy was already there, waiting with 2 basketballs. "First lesson," Jimmy said. "Champions practice when no one else is willing to practice." Rosalind described the routine that became Michael's life for the next 12 months. Every morning before school, footwork drills, defensive slides, and shooting from every spot on the court. Every afternoon after Jimmy's varsity practice ended, one-on-one games, conditioning sprints, more shooting. Saturdays and Sundays, 3-hour sessions working on weaknesses. Jimmy was relentless, Rosalind said. He didn't let Michael take shortcuts. If a shot didn't have perfect form, Michael had to shoot it again. If he didn't hustle on defense, they'd run sprints. Jimmy treated him like a varsity player, even though Michael was on the junior varsity team. That winter was brutal. January and February in Wilmington could be cold and wet. But Michael never missed a morning session. Never complained. He'd come home exhausted, do his homework, eat dinner, and fall asleep by 8 o'clock. Mama worried he was pushing too hard, Rosalind said. But Daddy understood. He told her, let the boy work. And Jimmy's teaching him more than basketball. He's teaching him what it means to commit to something. Michael's junior varsity games that year were dominant. He averaged 25 points per game, grew 2 inches by March, but more importantly, he developed a killer instinct, a refusal to lose that would define his career. Jimmy came to every JV game he could, Rosalind remembered. He'd sit in the stands and critique Michael afterward. You're playing lazy defense. You're settling for easy shots. You can be better. Jimmy never let Michael feel satisfied. By spring, Jimmy's senior season was ending. Laney made the playoffs but lost in the regional semifinals. Michael attended every varsity game studying how Jimmy played. His footwork, his court awareness, his leadership. After the final game, a loss to New Bern High School, Michael found Jimmy in the parking lot. Jimmy's high school career was over. He'd played well, 28 points in his final game, but he seemed distant, troubled. Mike, I need to tell you something, Jimmy said. Meet me at the court tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Rosalind's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Michael went to bed that night, excited. He thought Jimmy was going to tell him about college plans, maybe invite him to visit whatever school he chose. Michael had no idea what was really coming. She looked directly at Marcus. Saturday morning, April 22nd, 1979, that's when everything fell apart. That's when Michael's life changed forever, and the secret began. Marcus set down his pen. What happened? Rosalind stood and walked to the window, her back to Marcus. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Michael showed up at the court at 8:45. He waited. 9 o'clock came and went. 9:30, 10 o'clock. Jimmy never showed up. Why not? Rosalind turned around, tears streaming down her face. Because 12 hours earlier, on Friday night after that basketball game, Jimmy Parker got in his car to drive home, and he never made it. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Market Street and 17th, hit Jimmy's car on the driver's side at 60 miles per hour. Marcus's face went pale. Oh no. Jimmy was in a coma at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. We got the call Saturday afternoon. By Sunday night, he was gone. 18 years old. His whole life ahead of him. Dead because someone made a terrible choice to drink and drive. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Rosalind crying softly. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, letting the weight of the tragedy settle. Michael never found out what Jimmy wanted to tell him, Rosalind whispered. That secret died with Jimmy, or so Michael thought at the time. The guilt, the grief, the unanswered questions, they haunted my brother for years, still haunt him. Marcus sat motionless at Rosalind's kitchen table, his notebook forgotten. The weight of what she'd just told him hung in the air like a physical presence. Outside, a bird chirped, oblivious to the tragedy being recounted inside. Rosalind wiped her eyes and returned to her seat. Let me tell you about those 3 days in April 1979. Are the 3 days that created the man Michael Jordan became. She took a deep breath and continued. Friday, April 20th, Jimmy's last game. Laney High versus Newbern in the regional semifinals at the Wilmington Convention Center. Michael sat in the bleachers with our family. Jimmy played beautifully. 28 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists. But Laney lost by 6 points. Season over. Marcus noticed how precisely Rosalind remembered the details, as if that night had been frozen in time. After the game, the team was devastated. Michael waited outside the locker room for Jimmy. When Jimmy finally came out, he was quiet. Michael tried to cheer him up, talking about next year, about how Jimmy would play college ball. But Jimmy just looked at him with this strange expression. Sad, but also peaceful somehow. Rosalind closed her eyes, honey remembering. Jimmy put his hand on Michael's shoulder and said, "Mike, I need to tell you something important. Meet me at the court tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." Then he smiled and walked to his car. That was the last time Michael saw him alive, Marcus said softly. Yes. Jimmy drove away from the convention center around 9:30 that night. We found out later he went to a friend's house on Princess Place Drive, a boy named Kevin Washington from the basketball team. They hung out for about an hour, just talking, eating pizza. Kevin said Jimmy seemed happy, excited about something. Rosalind's hands trembled slightly as she continued. Jimmy left Kevin's house at 11 o'clock. He had a 15-minute drive home to his grandmother's house on Gordon Road. Should have been simple, safe. But at the intersection of Market Street and 17th, there's a traffic light. Always been a dangerous intersection. She paused, steadying herself. A man named Thomas Ridley, 42 years old, drunk, coming from a bar downtown, ran the red light at 60 miles per hour. Witnesses said he never even touched his brakes. Hit Jimmy's car directly on the driver's side door. The sound, people said, echoed for blocks. Marcus wrote carefully, capturing every detail. Jimmy's car spun 3 times and crashed into a telephone pole. Someone called an ambulance. Jimmy was unconscious when they pulled him out. Severe head trauma. They rushed him to New Hanover Regional Medical Center on South 17th Street, the same hospital where all of us Jordan kids were born. Rosalind stood and retrieved a tissue, dabbing her eyes. Saturday morning. Michael woke up early. He was excited. He got to the court at 8:45, 15 minutes early. He shot around by himself, practicing moves Jimmy had taught him. 9 o'clock came. No Jimmy. Michael wasn't worried at first. Sometimes Jimmy ran late. She described how Michael waited, shooting baskets, checking his watch every few minutes. 9:30, 10 o'clock. By 10:15, Michael was confused. Jimmy never missed their sessions. Never. Michael walked to Jimmy's grandmother's house, number 417 Gordon Road. When he got there, the house was empty. Mrs. Parker's car was gone. Michael thought maybe they'd gone to the store or to church. He went back home, still not worried, just puzzled. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, the Jordan family phone rang. It was Mrs. Parker's sister calling from the hospital. The words came out broken, and barely coherent. Jimmy had been in an accident. Critical condition. The family needed to come now. "I've never seen our mother move so fast," Rosalind said. She grabbed her purse, grabbed Michael, and we drove to the hospital. Daddy was at work, so Mama called him from the hospital. The whole family converged there within an hour. The scene at New Hanover Regional Medical Center was chaos. The emergency room was crowded, smelling of antiseptic and fear. Mrs. Lucille Parker sat in the waiting room, surrounded by family members from her church. She was 72 years old, a small woman who'd already lost her daughter and son-in-law in a car accident years before. Now she was losing her grandson the same way. Michael went straight to Mrs. Parker, Rosalind remembered. He knelt in front of her chair and took her hands. He was 15 years old, but in that moment he looked older somehow. He asked, "Is he going to be okay?" Mrs. Parker just shook her head and cried. The doctors came out every few hours with updates. Jimmy was unconscious. The head trauma was severe. Bleeding in the brain, fractured skull. They'd done emergency surgery, but the next 24 hours would be critical. All they could do was wait and pray. Michael refused to leave, Rosalind said. Mama tried to make him go home, eat something, rest, but he wouldn't budge. He sat in that orange plastic chair in the waiting room for 18 straight hours. Didn't eat, barely drank water, just sat there, staring at the emergency room doors, waiting for news. She described how the hours crawled by. The waiting room filled and emptied with other families, other emergencies. But the Jordan family stayed. Other Laney High students came, teammates, friends, teachers. Coach Herring came. The community rallied around Mrs. Parker and Jimmy. I watched Michael that day, Rosalind said. I saw something change in him. He was praying. I could see his lips moving. But he was also making deals with God. I know because later he told me. He promised God that if Jimmy lived, he'd never waste a day. He'd work harder than anyone. He'd make something of himself. He'd honor Jimmy by becoming everything Jimmy believed he could be. Saturday night turned into Sunday morning. Jimmy's condition didn't improve. The doctors prepared the family for the worst. The brain swelling wasn't going down. Even if he survived, there would likely be permanent damage. Sunday afternoon around 5 o'clock, Mrs. Parker asked to see Jimmy one last time, Rosalind said, her voice breaking. The doctors led her into the intensive care unit. She was in there for 20 minutes. When she came out, she looked at Michael and said, "He'd want you to say goodbye too." The nurses made an exception. Michael wasn't family and he was only 15. But they let him in. He walked into the ICU, past the machines and monitors, to the bed where Jimmy lay connected to tubes and wires. Michael told me later what he said to Jimmy, Rosalind whispered. He said, "I promise I'll make you proud. I promise I won't quit. I promise I'll remember everything you taught me." He stood there for 10 minutes holding Jimmy's hand, crying. At 7:45 Sunday evening, April 22nd, 1979, Jimmy Parker died. The machines flatlined. The doctors called it Mrs. while Parker collapsed in grief. The hospital chapel filled with people crying, praying, trying to make sense of senseless tragedy. Michael walked out of that hospital a different person, Rosalind said. The boy who'd walked in 18 hours earlier, innocent, hopeful, still believing the world was fair, that boy died with Jimmy. The person who walked out was harder, angrier, more determined. He had a purpose now, a mission. Marcus asked quietly, "What happened to the drunk driver?" Thomas Ridley survived without a scratch, got charged with vehicular manslaughter, served 4 years in prison, got out in 1983, moved away. Michael never spoke his name, never acknowledged he existed. To Michael, focusing on Ridley would be wasting energy that should go to honoring Jimmy. Rosalind gathered the photographs spread across the table, not her hands moving slowly, reverently. The funeral was Wednesday. That's when everything Michael had been holding inside came pouring out. And that's when Mrs. Parker gave him something that would guide him for the next 45 years. She looked at Marcus. "Are you ready to hear about the letter?" Marcus nodded, his pen poised above his notebook. Rosalind stood and walked to a drawer in her china cabinet. She pulled out a small wooden box, dark with age, and set it carefully on the table between them. "This box belonged to Michael," she said. "He gave it to me 10 years ago for safekeeping. Inside is a copy of the letter. The original he still keeps." She didn't open the box yet. First, she needed to describe the funeral. Wednesday, April 25th, 1979. First Baptist Church on 5th Avenue in Wilmington. The church holds about 300 people. That day, there were at least 400 crammed inside, with more standing outside in the spring sunshine. Rosalind described the scene with vivid clarity. The church was filled with flowers, white lilies, roses, carnations sent by families from the neighborhood, from Laney High School, from Mrs. Parker's church community. Jimmy's casket sat at the front, closed, covered with a spray of white roses. Mrs. Parker sat in the front pew, Rosalind continued. She wore black, a hat with a small veil. She looked so small, so broken. She'd buried her daughter and son-in-law 20 years earlier. Now she was burying the boy she'd raised as her own son. The Jordan family sat 3 rows back. Michael wore a suit that was slightly too small. He'd grown since Christmas. He sat between his mother and Rosalind, and staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes dry. He'd cried himself out at the hospital. Now he was somewhere else, somewhere unreachable. The service was traditional. Pastor Williams from First Baptist spoke about Jimmy's kindness, his love of basketball, his faith. The Laney High basketball team attended in their letter jackets. Coach Herring spoke briefly, his voice cracking about Jimmy's dedication and leadership. Then they asked if anyone else wanted to speak, Rosalind said. The church went quiet. No one moved. And then Michael stood up. Marcus looked up sharply. He spoke at the funeral? Our mother tried to pull him back down. He was only 15, grieving, not prepared. But Michael walked to the front of that church like he knew exactly what he needed to say. Rosalind's voice grew soft as she remembered. While he stood at the pulpit, he had to stand on his toes to reach the microphone. He looked out at all those people and he said, Jimmy Parker was my best friend. He taught me how to play basketball, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because he taught me something more important. Michael's voice had been steady, clear, much older than his 15 years. He told the congregation about meeting Jimmy at the court, about the summer of 1977, about getting cut from the team and wanting to quit, about Jimmy refusing to let him give up. Michael said, Jimmy told me that pain is proof you care enough to be great. I didn't understand what that meant then. I understand now. This pain I'm feeling, we're all feeling, it's because Jimmy mattered. He made our lives better, and the only way to honor him is to live the way he lived, to help people, to be kind, to never waste the gifts we've been given. The church had been silent except for quiet crying. Michael looked directly at Mrs. Parker and said, I promise I'll make you proud of him. I promise I'll remember everything he taught me. I promise his life meant something. Then Michael walked back to his seat and sat down. He didn't cry. He just stared at Jimmy's casket with an intensity that frightened Rosalind. After the service, they drove to Oakdale Cemetery on North 15th Street. The burial was private, just close family and friends. The day was warm, 75 degrees, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers. Birds sang in the oak trees surrounding the cemetery. They lowered Jimmy's casket into the ground, Rosalind said quietly. Mrs. Parker dropped a white rose on top. Other people did the same. Yet Michael stood there holding a basketball, one of the ones he and Jimmy had used at the court. For a moment, I thought he was going to throw it in the grave. But he didn't. He just held it against his chest. After the burial, people gathered at Mrs. Parker's house for a reception. The small home on Gordon Road filled with neighbors bringing food. Fried chicken, potato salad, green beans, sweet tea, pound cake. People told stories about Jimmy, laughed through tears, tried to celebrate his life even as they mourned his death. Michael stood in the corner, still holding that basketball, not eating, barely speaking. Rosalind watched him, worried. She'd never seen her brother so withdrawn. Then Mrs. Parker approached him. She was a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with dignity despite her grief. She took Michael's hand and led him outside to the front porch, away from the crowd. I followed them, Rosalind admitted to Marcus. I know I shouldn't have, but I was worried about Michael. I stood just inside the door where I could hear. Mrs. Parker sat on the porch swing, and Michael sat beside her. She reached into her black purse and pulled out a white envelope, slightly wrinkled, with Michael's name written on the front in Jimmy's handwriting. Jimmy gave me this 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Parker said, her voice hoarse from crying. He told me to keep it safe. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you. Michael stared at the envelope like it might burn him. Why would he think something would happen to him? I don't know, baby. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just being careful. Jimmy always thought about others. Always planned ahead. Mrs. Parker pressed the envelope into Michael's hands. He wanted you to have his words, his thoughts, whatever he couldn't say out loud. Michael's hands shook as he held the envelope. He didn't open it, not yet. Mrs. Parker continued. Jimmy loved you like a brother. He told me you were special. He said you were going to be somebody important. He saw something in you that maybe you didn't see in yourself yet. She touched Michael's cheek gently. Don't let his death be for nothing. Live big enough for both of you. Rosalind watched Michael nod, unable to speak. Mrs. Parker stood, kissed the top of his head, and went back inside, leaving Michael alone on the porch with the letter. I wanted to go to him, Rosalind told Marcus, but our mother stopped me. She said, let him be, and he needs this moment alone. So Michael sat on that porch swing for an hour, holding the unopened letter, watching the sun set over Gordon Road. People came and went from the house. Life continued around him, but Michael was frozen in that moment, holding the last words his best friend would ever say to him. Finally, as darkness fell and the streetlights flickered on, Michael stood. He walked home alone, still carrying the letter, still holding the basketball. He went straight to his bedroom and locked the door. None of us saw him again until morning, Rosalind said, but I know he read that letter that night, and I know it changed him forever. She finally opened the wooden box. Inside, protected in a clear plastic sleeve, was a photocopied letter, 2 pages, handwritten in neat blue ink. Michael made this copy in 1984 and gave it to me. He said if anything ever happened to him, the world should know what Jimmy wrote. He said Jimmy's words were too important to risk losing. Marcus leaned forward, and Rosalind read parts of the letter aloud, her voice thick with emotion. Dear Mike, if you're reading this, something happened to me. Don't be sad. Life is short, and we can't control everything. What we can control is how we treat people and what we do with our time. The letter continued with Jimmy reflecting on his own life, his gratitude for basketball, his love for his grandmother, his dreams of college and helping other kids. But the final paragraph was what mattered most. Mike, you're going to be great. I know it like I know the sun will rise. Not because you're the most talented, you're not yet, but because you care more than anyone I've ever met. And when you make it big, and you will, remember what matters. Not the points or the trophies, it's the people you help along the way. Be great on the court, but be greater off it. Make people's lives better. That's the real championship. Rosalind set the letter down carefully. Michael slept with this letter under his pillow for 2 years, carried it in his gym bag through high school. When he went to college, he kept it in his dorm room desk drawer. When he got drafted by the Bulls, he had it framed and hung in his apartment. It's the most important thing he owns. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, what did Michael do after reading it? He made a promise, Rosalind said simply. A promise that would define the next 45 years of his life. A promise that cost him millions of dollars and thousands of hours. A promise he kept secret from almost everyone. She looked directly at Marcus. The next morning, Michael woke up at 5 o'clock. He went to the outdoor court at Robert Strange Park. And he started practicing. Not for himself anymore, for Jimmy. Every shot, every drill, every drop of sweat. It was all for Jimmy. Rosalind refilled their coffee cups and settled back into her chair. The afternoon sun streamed through her kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where Jimmy's letter still lay in its protective sleeve. The transformation was immediate, she said. The morning after Jimmy's funeral, Michael was at that court before dawn. Our father drove past on his way to work and saw him there, alone, shooting in the half-light. Daddy said it looked like Michael was possessed. Marcus turned to a fresh page in his notebook as Rosalind continued. Michael became obsessive. He practiced 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours a day. Every morning before school, every afternoon, weekends. He wore out 3 pairs of sneakers that summer. Mama worried he was hurting himself, not grieving properly. But Daddy understood. He told her, that boy's turning pain into purpose. Let him work. Fall 1979 arrived. Michael tried out for the Laney High varsity team again, this time as a junior. Coach Herring barely recognized the player standing before him. Michael had grown to 5'11". More importantly, he developed an intensity that scared other players. Coach Herring told our parents later that Michael played tryouts like every possession was life or death, Roslyn said. He made the team easily. Not just made it, he was a starter. And that's when people in Wilmington started noticing something special. Michael's junior year statistics were remarkable. 28 points per game, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. But the numbers didn't capture what made him different. It was the way he played, relentless, fierce, refusing to lose. Before every game, Michael had this ritual, Roslyn explained. He'd go to the locker room 15 minutes before everyone else. He'd sit alone, take out a small piece of paper from his sock, and read it. We all knew what it was, a piece of Jimmy's letter. He'd folded it small enough to carry everywhere. She showed Marcus a photograph from Michael's junior year. Number 23, driving to the basket, his face a mask of determination. Notice the number. Everyone thinks he chose 23 because it's half of Larry's 45. That's what Michael told reporters, but it's not true. Marcus looked up. It's not? No. April 23rd. The date Jimmy died. Michael chose it to remember. Every time he pulled on that jersey, he was keeping Jimmy alive. The 1979 to 1980 season put Michael on the map. College scouts started attending Laney games. The local newspaper, the Wilmington Star-News, wrote features about the remarkable Jordan kid. But Michael never talked about Jimmy in interviews, never mentioned where his drive came from. That was private, sacred. After games, Michael would visit Mrs. Parker, Roslyn said. Every Friday night after home games, he'd stop by her house. Sometimes he'd just sit with her for an hour, not saying much. Other times he'd tell her about the game, about what he'd learned. She'd make him sweet tea and cookies. It was their ritual. Senior year brought more attention. Michael averaged over 30 points per game. Laney won the conference championship. Colleges from across the country recruited him. North Carolina, Duke, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina. Dean Smith from UNC came to Wilmington personally to watch Michael practice. I remember the day Coach Smith visited our house, Roslyn said, smiling at the memory. February 1981. He sat in our living room, this legendary coach, talking to Michael about Carolina basketball. And Michael asked him one question. Coach, do you believe basketball can change lives? Coach Smith had looked surprised but answered honestly. Absolutely. Basketball gave me opportunities I never would have had. Yeah, and it can do the same for you. Michael nodded and said, Then I want to play for you because I need to change lives, not just my own. Roslyn explained that Coach Smith didn't fully understand what Michael meant at the time. Nobody did. But Michael had already made his decision. He'd go to Chapel Hill, he'd learn from the best, and he'd use basketball as a platform for something bigger, honoring Jimmy's memory. Michael graduated from Laney in June 1981, Roslyn continued. At graduation, he dedicated his achievements to Jimmy Parker. Most people had forgotten about Jimmy by then. It had been 2 years. But not Michael, never Michael. That summer before college, Michael worked 2 jobs. One at a sporting goods store, one doing maintenance at the rec center. He saved every penny. When Mama asked why he needed money, his scholarship covered everything, he just said, for later. None of us knew what he was planning, Roslyn admitted. But Michael had already decided that when he made it to the NBA, when he started earning real money, he'd create something permanent in Jimmy's name. He was 17 years old, planning a legacy for a friend nobody else remembered. At the University of North Carolina, Michael continued his transformation. Freshman year was challenging. He was good, but not yet great. He practiced more than anyone else on the team. His roommate Buzz Peterson told reporters years later that Michael would wake up at 6 in the morning to shoot, even after late games. Then came March 29, 1982, Roslyn said, her voice rising with emotion. The NCAA championship game. North Carolina versus Georgetown, at the Superdome in New Orleans. Freshman Michael Jordan against Patrick Ewing. Marcus knew the story. Everyone did. Michael hit the game-winning shot with 17 seconds left, giving North Carolina the national championship. It was the shot that launched his legend. But here's what people don't know, Roslyn said. After Michael hit that shot, the cameras caught him looking up at the ceiling, Everyone assumed he was celebrating, overwhelmed by the moment, but he wasn't. She pulled out a grainy photograph from a newspaper clipping. Michael, mouth moving, looking upward. Our mother was watching on TV. She called me immediately. She said, "Did you see Michael? Did you see what he said?" Rosalind had recorded the game on VHS. She'd watched that moment over and over, studying Michael's lips. He was saying, "That was for you, Jimmy. That was for you." The championship transformed Michael's life. He became a celebrity on campus, a projected NBA star, a name everyone knew. But privately, Michael remained focused on his promise. During his sophomore and junior years at Carolina, Michael visited Mrs. Parker whenever he came home to Wilmington, Rosalind said. She was getting older, more frail. He'd bring her groceries, fix things around her house, sit and talk. She'd ask about college, about basketball, about his dreams. In one of those conversations during Christmas break 1983, Michael told Mrs. Parker something that shocked her. "When I make it to the NBA, I'm going to start a fund, in Jimmy's name, to help kids who need basketball the way I needed Jimmy." Mrs. Parker had cried. "Michael, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," he'd said. "I made Jimmy a promise, and I'm going to keep it." June 1984 arrived. Michael declared for the NBA draft after his junior year. He was selected third overall by the Chicago Bulls, after Hakeem Olajuwon and Sam Bowie. People said it was a mistake that Michael fell to third. Michael didn't care. He was finally a professional. Finally had the resources to do what he'd been planning for 5 years. The night he was drafted, Michael called me, Rosalind remembered. He was in New York at the draft. He was happy but also serious. He said, "Roz, I need your help. I need to set something up. Something big. Something that'll last forever." That summer, before his rookie season started, Michael returned to Wilmington one more time. He visited Mrs. Parker on a Tuesday afternoon in July. The meeting lasted 3 hours. They sat on her front porch, like the same porch where she'd given him Jimmy's letter 5 years earlier. "Nobody knows what they talked about that day," Rosalind said. "Michael never told anyone, except me, and only years later. But I know this. He asked Mrs. Parker's permission to honor Jimmy publicly, to create something that would carry his name forward, to turn private grief into public good." Mrs. Parker had given her blessing, but she'd made Michael promise one thing. "Don't do this for recognition. Don't do it for credit. Do it because it's right." Jimmy wouldn't want to fuss. He'd want kids to be helped. Quietly, the way he helped you. Michael had agreed. The fund would be anonymous. No press releases, no publicity. Just steady, consistent help for kids who needed it. In August 1984, 1 month before his first NBA game, Michael signed his first endorsement deal with Nike, Rosalind explained. Air Jordan was born. People don't realize that before Michael even played a professional game, he'd already established a trust. The James Parker Memorial Fund? She showed Marcus bank documents, photocopies Michael had given her years later. The first deposit, $50,000. The date, August 15, 1984. Michael's first major endorsement check, split between his family and the fund. That money went to a struggling community center on Chicago's South Side, Rosalind said. The Englewood Youth Center. Michael chose Chicago because that's where he'd be playing. He chose Englewood because it was one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city. He chose a youth center because that's where kids like him, kids who needed basketball, and kids who needed hope, would go. The fund was structured carefully. A Chicago law firm, Barrett and Associates, managed it. Donations were anonymous. No receipts, no recognition, no public acknowledgement. Just help, year after year, quietly changing lives. Michael's rookie season was incredible, Rosalind said. Rookie of the Year, All-Star. The Bulls were suddenly exciting. Air Jordans flew off shelves. But while the world watched Michael become a superstar, he was quietly keeping a promise to a boy nobody else remembered. She paused, looking at Marcus. From 1984 to 2019, Michael donated to that fund every single year. Sometimes $50,000. sometimes 100,000, sometimes more. He never missed a year, never asked for credit, never told anyone except the lawyers who managed it, and eventually, me. Marcus did quick math. 35 years of donations. That's millions of dollars. Over 8 million, Rosalind confirmed. But it wasn't just money. Michael visited the Inglewood Youth Center anonymously 3 times, 1986, 1991, and 1998. He'd go at night, wear regular clothes, shoot baskets with kids who didn't recognize him or didn't believe it was really him. He'd talk to them about working hard, staying in school, making good choices. She showed Marcus more photographs. Grainy, informal shots of Michael at the center, always dressed down, always smiling, always engaged with kids. The center's director, a man named Robert Hayes, knew who the donor was, Rosalind said. Michael made him promise to keep it secret. Mr. Hayes kept that promise until he died in 2015. He never told anyone, not even his family. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Why keep it secret? This is beautiful. People would have celebrated him for it. Because Jimmy's letter said to be greater off the court than on it, Rosalind answered simply. Because real charity doesn't need applause. Because Michael was keeping a promise to a dead friend, not building a brand. She leaned forward, her voice intense. For 40 years, Michael Jordan lived 2 lives. The public life, the championships, the fame, the legend, and the private life, the promise keeper, the secret benefactor, the boy who never forgot the friend who saved him. Marcus asked, "When did you find out about all this?" 2001, Rosalind said. Michael called me and asked me to become the trustee of the fund. He said he was getting older. He wanted someone he trusted to manage it. I said yes, but only if he told me everything. So he did. And I've been keeping his secret ever since. She looked out the window at the fading afternoon light. But the secret got bigger in 2019. That's when Michael discovered something that changed everything. Something that made this whole story even more impossible, even more meaningful. Marcus waited, knowing what was coming. That's when we found Jimmy's grandson, Rosalind whispered. And everything Michael thought he knew about Jimmy's life turned out to be incomplete. Marcus Webb set down his coffee cup, his journalist instincts fully engaged. "This is how I found you," he said. "The trail of donations. Can you walk me through what led to discovering Jimmy's grandson?" Rosalind nodded. "Let me start with how you found us, and then I'll tell you how we found Darius." She explained that Marcus's investigation had been thorough and impressive. He'd started in 2021, researching community centers in Chicago for a series on urban youth programs. The Inglewood Youth Center kept appearing in his research, a place that had survived when dozens of similar centers had closed. "I interviewed the current director, a woman named Patricia Monroe," Marcus said, picking up the story. "She told me the center had been saved multiple times by an anonymous donor. I asked how much, and she said she didn't know exactly. Millions over the years. That caught my attention. He'd filed Freedom of Information requests, searched tax records, tracked down former board members. Everything pointed to a trust managed by Barrett and Associates in downtown Chicago. But the trust documents were sealed. I spent 6 months trying to get those records unsealed," Marcus continued. Finally, a retired lawyer from the firm, a man named Gerald Barrett who'd moved to Florida, agreed to talk to me off the record. He wouldn't give me names, but he gave me one piece of information. The trust was called the James Parker Memorial Fund. Rosalind smiled slightly. Gerald called Michael to warn him. Michael told him it was fine, that eventually this story would come out. He knew it couldn't stay secret forever. I searched for James Parker, Marcus said. Found death records from Wilmington, North Carolina, 1979. Found his grandmother's obituary from 2003. Found his connection to your family, 3 houses down on Gordon Road. Then I found old Laney High School yearbooks and saw Jimmy with the basketball team. That's when I knew I was onto something real. He'd traced Michael's movements that summer of 1984. The return to Wilmington, the visit to Mrs. Parker's house, the timing of the trust's creation. Everything connected, but Marcus needed confirmation. That's when he'd called Rosalind. "Now, tell me about Darius," Marcus said. "How did you discover him?" Rosalind took a deep breath. "In 2018, I was managing the fund's annual donation to the Inglewood Youth Center. Patricia Monroe sent me the usual report. Number of kids served, programs offered, success stories. One story stood out. She described reading about a young man named Darius Parker who'd grown up in Inglewood, attended the center's program since he was 8 years old, and had just earned a basketball scholarship to North Carolina A&T State University. Yeah, the last name stopped me cold," Rosalind said. "Parker, I thought it had to be coincidence." Parker's not an uncommon name, but something made me dig deeper. She'd called Patricia Monroe and asked about Darius's background. Patricia explained that Darius had lost his father to drug addiction in 2015. His father's name was Calvin Parker. Calvin had grown up in Chicago but was originally from North Carolina. His mother had moved there when she was pregnant. "I felt my heart stop," Rosalind said. "I asked Patricia if she knew anything about Calvin's father. She said Calvin had told her once that his father died in a car accident before Calvin was born, in North Carolina in 1979. The timeline matched perfectly. Rosalind had immediately begun researching. She'd hired a private investigator, discreetly, paying with her own money. I'm not telling Michael yet. She needed to be sure before opening old wounds. The investigator, a woman named Sharon Mills from Chicago, traced Calvin Parker's birth records. Born November 1979 in Chicago to a mother named Teresa Watkins. Teresa had been 17 years old, a recent transfer to a Chicago high school from Wilmington, North Carolina. Sharon found Teresa, Rosalind said quietly. She's 62 now, living in Atlanta. Sharon approached her carefully, explained why she was asking. Teresa broke down. She'd kept the secret for 40 years. Teresa's story was heartbreaking. She and Jimmy had dated briefly in early 1979, February and March. They were young, careful, but not careful enough. Teresa discovered she was pregnant in April, right around the time Jimmy died. Teresa was terrified, Rosalind explained. She was 17. Her boyfriend was dead. Her parents were strict and religious. She didn't tell anyone, not Jimmy's grandmother, not her friends, nobody. She hid the pregnancy as long as she could. In July 1979, Teresa's aunt in Chicago offered her a fresh start. Teresa moved there, had the baby in November, named him Calvin after her grandfather. She built a new life away from Wilmington, away from the memories. Teresa said she wanted to tell Mrs. Parker, Rosalind continued, but she was young and scared. Months passed, then years. It became easier to just keep moving forward. She convinced herself it was better this way. Mrs. Parker had lost so much already. Why burden her with a grandson she'd never met? Calvin grew up not knowing his father's name or story. Teresa told him his father had died in an accident, nothing more. Calvin struggled. Dropped out of high school, got involved with drugs, spent time in jail. But he had one good thing in his life. His son Darius, born in 2000. Calvin died of an overdose in 2015, Rosalind said, her voice heavy. He was only 35. But before he died, he told Darius one thing. Your grandfather loved basketball. It's in your blood. Darius had found basketball as a way to honor a grandfather he'd never known. He'd walked into the Inglewood Youth Center at 8 years old, picked up a ball, and discovered he had a gift. For 10 years, Darius was helped by Michael's fund, Rosalind said. New shoes when his wore out, registration fees for leagues, money for a summer basketball camp. And he had no idea where the help came from. Just that the center always seemed to have resources when kids needed them. When Rosalind confirmed the connection in late 2018, she faced an impossible decision. Tell Michael and risk reopening old wounds? Or keep the secret and deny Jimmy's grandson the chance to know his heritage? I prayed about it for weeks, Rosalind admitted. Finally, I decided Michael deserved to know. In January 2019, I called him. He was in Charlotte. I said, "Michael, I need you to sit down. I have something to tell you about Jimmy." She described Michael's reaction: disbelief, shock, then overwhelming emotion. Jimmy had a son. Jimmy had a grandson. And he's been helped by my fund this whole time? The coincidence felt impossible, yet it was real. For 10 years, Michael had been unknowingly helping his dead best friend's grandson. The promise he'd made in 1979 had come full circle in a way he could never have imagined. Michael flew to Chicago the next day, Rosalind said. I met him there. We went to the Inglewood Youth Center together. Patricia Monroe had arranged for Darius to be there. She told him that a special donor wanted to meet him. She described the scene. January 15th, 2019, a cold Chicago afternoon. The center's gymnasium was empty except for Patricia, Rosalind, Michael, and Darius. Darius walked in wearing his North Carolina A&T warm-up suit, Rosalind remembered. He was 19, tall like Jimmy, with the same gentle eyes. When he saw Michael Jordan, he froze. He thought he was dreaming. Michael had walked up to Darius, extended his hand, and said, "I knew your grandfather. But he was my best friend. He changed my life. And I need to tell you his story." They'd sat in the bleachers for 3 hours. Michael told Darius everything. The summer of 1977, the friendship, the cut, the promise, the accident, the letter. He told him about the fund, about 40 years of keeping a secret, about how basketball had saved both of them. Darius cried, Rosalind said softly. He'd spent his whole life wondering why he loved basketball so much, why it felt like destiny. Now he knew. It was literally in his blood. His grandfather's gift passed down through generations. Michael had asked Darius about his father, about his life, about his dreams. Darius talked about growing up in Inglewood, losing his dad, finding purpose in basketball. He talked about wanting to teach, to coach, to help other kids the way he'd been helped. That's when Michael realized something, Rosalind said. Jimmy's legacy wasn't just in the fund or the center. It was alive in Darius. Jimmy's kindness, his desire to help others, it had survived death, survived decades, survived everything. At the end of their conversation, Michael had made Darius an offer. "I'll pay for your entire college education, books, housing, everything. And when you graduate, if you want to come back to Inglewood and work with kids, I'll support that too. But there's one condition." Darius had nodded, ready to agree to anything. "You can never tell anyone about this until I say it's okay," Michael said. "This isn't about me getting credit. This is about honoring your grandfather the right way. Can you do that?" Darius had agreed. For 4 years, he'd kept the secret. He'd attended college, played basketball, earned his degree in education. He'd graduated in May 2023 and returned to Chicago to teach and coach at the Inglewood Youth Center. But keeping the secret aided him, Rosalind explained. Darius felt like he was dishonoring his grandfather by hiding the truth. He wanted people to know Jimmy's name. He wanted the world to understand what real greatness looked like. In October 2023, Darius had written Michael a letter, echoing the letter Jimmy had written 44 years earlier. He'd asked permission to tell the story publicly, to honor Jimmy, to show people who Michael really was. "Michael called me in tears," Rosalind said. "He read me Darius's letter. He said, 'Roz, what do I do? I never wanted attention for this, but Darius is right. Jimmy deserves to be remembered.'" They'd debated for weeks. Finally, Michael had agreed, but only if the story was told accurately, completely, with dignity. That's why Rosalind had chosen to speak with Marcus. She'd read his work. She trusted him to get it right. "There's one more piece," Rosalind said, her voice dropping. "The biggest secret of all. The one Michael has never told anyone except me. The reason he's carried guilt for 45 years. Marcus leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the story. "It's about the night Jimmy died," Rosalind whispered. "About why Michael was supposed to be in that car." The afternoon light had faded to early evening. Rosalind stood and turned on the kitchen lamp. casting a warm glow across the table. Marcus could see the weight of what she was about to reveal in her eyes. "Before I tell you about that night," Rosalind said, I need to tell you about meeting Darius. Really meeting him. Because understanding who he is makes the rest of this story matter." She sat back down, her hands wrapped around her now cold coffee cup. After that first meeting in January 2019, Michael stayed in Chicago for 3 days. He wanted to know everything about Darius. They met every day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Michael was making up for 40 years of lost connection. Darius had grown up in one of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods. Inglewood had some of the highest crime rates in the city. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep them in a small apartment on South Racine Avenue. His father, Calvin, drifted in and out of their lives, struggling with addiction. Darius told Michael about being 8 years old, hearing gunshots every night, Rosalind said, and about walking past drug dealers on his way to school, about watching his father disappear for weeks at a time. Basketball was his escape, the only place he felt safe. The Englewood Youth Center, located at 815 West 63rd Street, became Darius's second home. He'd go there after school on weekends during summers. The staff knew him, protected him, encouraged him. And all that time, Michael's money was keeping the center alive, Rosalind said. The basketball program, the tutoring services, the safe space, all funded by the James Parker Memorial Fund. Darius was being saved by his grandfather's memory without even knowing it. Michael had asked Darius about his father's death. The story was painful. Calvin had been clean for 6 months in 2015, living with Darius and his mother, working at a warehouse. Then he relapsed. One night in August, he overdosed in a motel room on Ashland Avenue. He was alone. He died alone. Darius was 15 when it happened, Rosalind said quietly. The same age Michael was when Jimmy died. That connection hit Michael hard. 2 generations, same age, same loss. History repeating itself. But Darius hadn't let his father's death destroy him. He'd thrown himself into basketball, into school, into becoming someone his father never got the chance to be. His coaches at the center recognized his talent and dedication. They helped him get into a better high school, connected him with AAU teams, pushed him toward college. By the time Darius graduated high school in 2018, he'd earned a full scholarship to North Carolina A&T, Rosalind said. Not because he was the most talented player, there were better athletes, but because he worked harder than everyone else. Because he refused to let his circumstances define him. Michael saw himself in that drive, the refusal to quit, the transformation of pain into purpose. During those 3 days in Chicago, Michael took Darius to dinner at Jean and Giorgetti, a famous steakhouse downtown. It was private, quiet. Michael wanted to know about Darius's dreams. "I want to be a teacher," Darius had said. "Elementary school, maybe middle school. And I want to coach. I want to help kids like me, kids who need basketball to survive." Michael had smiled. "That's exactly what your grandfather wanted to do." He'd told Darius more stories about Jimmy, the patient way he taught, the encouraging words he'd give, the belief he had that basketball could change lives. Darius listened, hungry for any detail about the grandfather he'd never known. "Do you have a picture of him?" Darius had asked. Michael had pulled out his phone and shown Darius the photograph from the summer of 1977. Jimmy and young Michael on the outdoor court in Wilmington. Darius stared at it for a long time, tears running down his face. "I look like him," Darius whispered. "I have his eyes." "You have more than his eyes," Michael said. "You have his heart. The way you talk about wanting to help kids, that's Jimmy. That's exactly who he was." On the 3rd day, Michael took Darius to meet Teresa Watkins, his grandmother, Jimmy's teenage girlfriend, who'd kept the secret for 40 years. Teresa had flown to Chicago at Michael's request and expense. She'd never met her grandson as an adult. The reunion was emotional, Rosalind said. Teresa hadn't seen Darius since Calvin's funeral in 2015. She'd stayed away, ashamed of the secrets she'd kept, the choices she'd made. But now Michael had brought them together. They'd met at a quiet restaurant in Hyde Park. Teresa, now 60 years old, looked at the young man her son had become after death. Darius looked at the grandmother who'd known his grandfather, who'd loved him, who'd carried his child. Teresa told Darius everything: how she'd met Jimmy, how kind he'd been, how they'd dated for just 2 months before he died. She told him about being 17 and pregnant and terrified, about moving to Chicago, about raising Calvin alone, about all the mistakes and regrets. "I'm sorry I kept you from knowing your grandfather's family," Teresa said through tears. "And I'm sorry I was too scared to do the right thing." Darius took her hand. "You did the best you could. You were just a kid yourself." Michael watched this reunion, 3 generations connected by Jimmy Parker's brief life, and felt something shift inside him. The guilt he'd carried for 40 years began to crack. Jimmy's legacy wasn't just pain and loss, it was this: a grandson who survived, who thrived, who carried Jimmy's kindness forward. "After that trip, Michael called me every week to talk about Darius," Rosalind said. "He followed his college career, sent care packages, checked on his grades. He became a mentor, like Jimmy had been for him." Darius excelled at North Carolina A&T. He wasn't a star player, averaged 8 points per game, but he was a leader, a role model, someone younger players looked up to. He graduated in May 2023 with a degree in elementary education and a 3.7 GPA. At graduation, Michael attended in disguise, Rosalind said, smiling. Wore a hat and sunglasses, sat in the back. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to see Darius walk across that stage. After graduation, Darius had 2 job offers. One to teach at a suburban school with better pay, one to return to the Inglewood Youth Center as a teacher and basketball coach. The choice was obvious to him. "I'm going back to Inglewood," Darius told Michael on the phone. "That place saved my life. Now I want to save others." Michael had expected that answer. He'd arranged with the center's board to create a new position, Youth Programs Director. Darius would teach, coach, and develop new programs to help at-risk kids. The salary came from the James Parker Memorial Fund. In August 2023, Darius started his new job. He worked with kids ages 8 to 18, the same ages he'd been when the center helped him. He taught them basketball fundamentals, but more importantly, he taught them that their circumstances didn't have to define their futures. One night in September, Darius called me, Rosalind said. He was struggling with something. He said, "Miss Jordan, I'm living my dream. I'm helping kids. I'm honoring my grandfather, but I feel like I'm living a lie. Nobody knows the truth about who I am, who my grandfather was, what Mr. Jordan did. It feels wrong to keep this secret." She'd listened to him talk for an hour. He felt guilty accepting Michael's help without anyone knowing. He felt like Jimmy deserved public recognition. He felt like the story could inspire others. Kids in Englewood who felt hopeless, young people who'd lost loved ones, anyone who needed to believe that kindness echoes through generations. "I told him I'd talk to Michael," Rosalind said, "but I knew it would be a difficult conversation. Michael had spent 40 years keeping this private. Changing that would mean opening himself up to judgment, questions, scrutiny he'd carefully avoided." In October 2023, Darius wrote his letter to Michael. It was 3 pages long, handwritten, deeply personal. He explained his feelings, his reasoning, his hope that the story could do good in the world. The letter's final paragraph read, "Mr. Jordan, you taught me that basketball is just a game. What matters is what we do for others. Let me do this for you. Let me tell people who you really are. Let the world know that my grandfather mattered, that his life meant something, that true greatness isn't measured in championships but in promises kept." Michael received the letter at his home in Charlotte. He called Rosalind immediately. "I don't know what to do," he said. "I never wanted this public, but Darius is right. Jimmy deserves to be remembered." They'd debated for weeks. Michael worried about how the story would be received. Would people think he was bragging? Would it cheapen what he'd done? Would it turn something sacred into a media spectacle? "Finally, I asked him a question," Rosalind said. "I asked, if Jimmy were here today, What would he tell you to do? Michael had gone quiet. Then he'd said softly, "He'd tell me to help people however I can, even if it means being uncomfortable." That's when Michael agreed, but he had conditions. The story had to be accurate, complete, and told by someone trustworthy. That's where Marcus Webb came in. "When you called me," Rosalind told Marcus, "I'd already been looking for the right journalist. Someone who'd done their homework, who cared about truth, who'd treat this story with respect. Your investigation showed me you were that person." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. "There's one more thing you need to know. The thing Michael has never told anyone but me. The secret that explains everything. His drive, his intensity, his refusal to fail." Marcus waited, his pen ready. Rosalind turned to face him, tears in her eyes. "The night Jimmy died, Michael was supposed to be in that car with him. And the reason he wasn't haunted him for 45 years. Marcus sat frozen, his notebook open, but his pen still. And the kitchen had grown dark, except for the single lamp, casting shadows that seemed to hold the weight of decades. "Tell me about that night," Marcus said quietly. Rosalind returned to her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. "April 20th, 1979, after the basketball game. This is what Michael finally told me in 2005, 26 years after it happened. He'd kept it inside all that time." She took a shaky breath and continued. "After Laney lost to New Bern, Jimmy met Michael in the parking lot. Jimmy was disappointed about the loss, but trying to stay positive. He told Michael, 'Hey, I'm going to Kevin Washington's house. His mom made pizza. Come with me. We'll hang out, forget about the game.' Michael had been excited. He loved spending time with Jimmy and the older players. It made him feel included, important. 'Let me ask my mom,' Michael had said. They'd driven home separately, Jimmy in his grandmother's old Buick, Michael with their father who'd attended the game. When they got home, Michael immediately asked his mother, Dolores, for permission. Mama said no, Rosalind explained. She was firm about it. Michael had school the next day. He'd been staying out late too often. She told him, "You need to stay home tonight. You can see Jimmy tomorrow." Michael had argued. He'd pleaded. He was 15 years old and felt the injustice of parental rules. Why couldn't he go? It was just a couple hours. Jimmy would be there. What was the harm? But Mama wouldn't budge, Rosalind said. Daddy backed her up. They told Michael the answer was no, and that was final. Jimmy could go if he wanted, but Michael was staying home. Michael had been furious. He'd stormed to his room, slammed the door, turned his music up loud. Typical teenage rebellion. Rosalind remembered hearing him sulking, occasionally yelling through the door that it wasn't fair. Around 8:30 that evening, Jimmy had stopped by the Jordan house. He'd knocked on Michael's bedroom window. They were on the first floor. Michael opened the window, still angry. "Your mom won't let you come?" Jimmy asked. "No, she's being unfair." Jimmy had smiled sympathetically. "Parents, man. It's cool. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow. We still meeting at the court at 9? "Yeah," Michael had said. "And Jimmy, I'm sorry about the game." "Don't be. We'll win next year." "Well, you will. I'll be in college." Jimmy had grinned. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late. I got something important to tell you." Those were the last words Jimmy spoke to Michael. He'd waved, walked back to his car, and driven away. Michael watched from his window, still angry at his mother, wishing he could have gone. At 11:15, the accident happened, Rosalind said softly. Market Street and 17th. Jimmy was driving home from Kevin's house alone. If Michael had been with him... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Michael tortured himself with that thought, Rosalind continued. If he'd been in the car, maybe they would have left at a different time. Maybe they would have taken a different route. Maybe they would have stopped somewhere and missed that intersection entirely. Maybe Michael could have seen the drunk driver coming and yelled a warning. The guilt consumed Michael in the days and weeks after Jimmy's death. He'd replayed that night thousands of times in his mind. He'd been angry at his mother for saying no. Then he'd felt crushing guilt for being angry at her, when she'd inadvertently saved his life. "Mama knew," Rosalind said. "She saw it in Michael's eyes at the hospital, at the funeral. She tried to talk to him about it, but he wouldn't open up. He just said he was fine, he was handling it." But Michael wasn't handling it. The survivor's guilt became the engine of his obsession. Every morning practice, every late-night shooting session, every moment he pushed himself past exhaustion. It was all driven by one thought. Jimmy died so I could live. I can't waste this. Michael felt like he'd been given Jimmy's life in addition to his own, Rosalind explained. Like he had to accomplish enough for two people. He had to be great enough to justify why he survived and Jimmy didn't. That's why Michael became known for his legendary work ethic. Why he practiced harder than anyone else. Why he refused to accept defeat. Why he played through injuries. Why he won 6 championships. It wasn't just competitive drive, it was survivor's guilt transformed into relentless purpose. In the late 90s, Michael finally started therapy, Rosalind said. The Bulls team psychologist noticed signs of what they call survivor's guilt. Michael was reluctant at first, but eventually he opened up. He worked through a lot of those feelings over the years. The therapy helped Michael understand that Jimmy's death wasn't his fault. That his mother's decision wasn't wrong. That random tragedy doesn't follow logic or fairness. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things. Even now, at 61 years old, Michael sometimes struggles with it, Rosalind said. Especially on April 23rd every year. He spends that day alone usually, reflecting, remembering. Marcus asked gently, "Does he still feel guilty?" Not the way he used to. Therapy helped him see that guilt wasn't honoring Jimmy. Living well was honoring Jimmy. Making a difference was honoring Jimmy. But there's still sadness. Still the question that can never be answered. Why did I survive and not him? That question drove everything Michael did off the court. The anonymous donations, the secret fund, the refusal to take credit. And he wasn't trying to be humble. He was trying to balance some cosmic ledger. Jimmy's life for his life. Jimmy's kindness for his success. When Michael met Darius in 2019, something shifted, Rosalind said. For the first time in 40 years, the guilt began to lift, because Darius was proof that Jimmy's legacy survived, that Jimmy's bloodline continued, that death hadn't won completely. She described a conversation Michael had with Darius during one of their dinners. Darius had asked directly, "Mr. Jordan, do you feel guilty that my grandfather died and you lived?" Michael had been shocked by the directness. But Darius was 24 years old, a teacher, mature beyond his years. He deserved honesty. "Yes," Michael had admitted. "Yeah, I'm every day for 40 years. Darius had looked at him with those eyes that were so much like Jimmy's and said something that changed everything. "Mr. Jordan, my grandfather didn't die so you could feel guilty. He died because a drunk driver made a terrible choice. That's not on you, but you lived, and you made my grandfather's name mean something. You turned his kindness into a legacy that saved me. That's not guilt, that's love." Those words broke something open in Michael. He'd cried in that restaurant, not caring who saw, because Darius was right. The 40 years of secret donations, of kept promises, of dedication to helping others, that wasn't guilt. That was love. That's when Michael decided he was ready to tell the story, Rosalind said. Not for recognition, but because Darius helped him see it differently. The story wasn't about Michael's guilt or Michael's generosity. It was about Jimmy's impact, about how one person's kindness can ripple across decades, across generations. But first, Michael needed to do one more thing. In December 2023, he flew to Wilmington. He drove to Oakdale Cemetery on North 15th Street. He stood at Jimmy Parker's grave, a simple headstone that read, "James Parker, 1961 to 1979, beloved grandson." Michael stood there for an hour, Rosalind said. He told Jimmy everything. About Darius, about the fund, about the decision to go public. He asked Jimmy for permission, in a way. Asked if this was the right thing to do. Of course, there was no answer. Just wind rustling through oak trees and birds singing in the afternoon light. But Michael felt peace. He felt for the first time in 45 years, like he'd kept his promise completely. When Michael returned to Charlotte, he called Rosalind. "I'm ready," he said. "Find the right person to tell this story. Someone who'll do it justice. Someone who'll make sure people know Jimmy's name." That's when Rosalind had been waiting for Marcus's call. She'd already researched him, read his articles, knew his reputation for thorough, compassionate journalism. When he called about the James Parker Memorial Fund, she knew it was meant to be. "So here we are," Rosalind said to Marcus. "I've told you everything. The friendship, the death, the promise, the guilt, the grandson, all of it. Now comes the hard part." Marcus looked up. "What's the hard part?" "Telling it to the world," Rosalind said. "Making people understand that this isn't a feel-good story about a generous celebrity. This is a story about grief, about love, about how we honor the people who save us. This is about Michael Jordan the person, not Michael Jordan the icon." She stood and gathered the photographs spread across the table. "Michael wants you to meet him. He wants you to see the letter, the original letter from Jimmy. He wants to look you in the eye and make sure you understand what this means to him." Marcus closed his notebook. "When?" "Tomorrow, in Charlotte, at his office." Rosalind smiled slightly. "He's nervous. He's never done anything like this before. For 40 years, he's controlled his image carefully. This is different. This is vulnerability. This is truth." She walked Marcus to the door. The night was cool and clear, stars visible above Charlotte's suburbs. "One more thing," Rosalind said as Marcus prepared to leave. "Alex, when you write this story, start with Jimmy, not with Michael. Jimmy deserves to be the hero, because he was. He saved a lost kid who became the greatest basketball player ever. But more than that, he taught that kid how to be a good man. That's the real story." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what he'd been given. "I won't let you down. I won't let Jimmy down." "I know," Rosalind said softly. "That's why we chose you." Marcus Webb arrived at Michael Jordan's private office in Charlotte at 10 o'clock the next morning. The building was unmarked, located in a quiet business park away from downtown. No signs announced who worked there. Privacy was everything. A security guard checked Marcus's identification and escorted him to the third floor. The office was surprisingly modest. Leather chairs, basketball memorabilia on the walls, photographs of Michael's children. But what caught Marcus's attention was a single frame on the desk. Young Michael and Jimmy Parker on an outdoor court, summer 1977. Michael Jordan entered the room a few minutes later. He wore jeans and a simple black sweater. At 61, he still carried himself with athletic grace, but his eyes showed something Marcus hadn't expected: nervousness. "Mr. Webb," Michael said, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming, and thank you for being patient with this story. I know it's taken a long time." They sat across from each other. Marcus noticed Michael's hands weren't quite steady. "Rosalind told you everything?" Michael asked. "She told me about Jimmy, about the friendship, his death, the fund, and Darius. She told me about the guilt you've carried." Michael nodded slowly. Did she tell you about that night? About why I wasn't in the car?" "She did." Michael stood and walked to the window, his back to Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "For 45 years, I've lived with one thought. I should have died that night too. Every achievement, every championship, every moment of success. There's always been a shadow. Jimmy should have been there too." He turned around, and Marcus saw tears in his eyes. "People think they know me. They think I'm this fierce competitor, this driven athlete. They don't know that everything I did came from guilt, from feeling like I had to live big enough for two people." Michael returned to his chair and leaned forward. "The night Jimmy died, I was in my bedroom, angry at my mother for not letting me go. I was 15 years old, acting like a spoiled kid. While I was pouting, Jimmy was at Kevin Washington's house having pizza. While I was playing music too loud, Jimmy was driving home alone. His voice cracked. At 11:15, while I was falling asleep, Jimmy's car was hit. The police report said death was instantaneous. The drunk driver, Thomas Ridley, ran that red light at 60 miles per hour. Jimmy never saw it coming, never had a chance. Marcus remained silent, letting Michael continue. The next morning, I woke up still angry about not being allowed to go out. I got to the court at 8:45, ready to practice. I waited. I shot around. I kept checking my watch, annoyed that Jimmy was late. I had no idea that while I was shooting baskets, Jimmy was in the hospital dying. Michael wiped his eyes. When I found out what happened, my very first thought was, I was supposed to be there. If my mom had said yes, I would have been in that car. I would have died too. He described the complicated feelings that followed. Relief that he'd survived, immediately followed by crushing guilt for feeling relieved. Anger at his mother for saving his life by saying no. Then more guilt for being angry. Grief for Jimmy mixed with the horrifying thought that his friend had died alone. At the hospital, I made all these deals with God, Michael said. If Jimmy lives, I'll be better. I'll work harder. I'll never complain. But God didn't take that deal. Jimmy died anyway. So I made a different promise. I'll live for both of us. I'll accomplish enough for two people. I'll make Jimmy's death mean something. That promise became the foundation of everything. The obsessive practice schedule. The refusal to accept defeat. The 6 championships. The global icon. All of it built on survivor's guilt. People always ask where my competitive drive came from, Michael said. They think it's just natural talent or personality. But it's not. It's guilt. It's the feeling that I'm playing on borrowed time. That every day I'm alive is a day Jimmy should have had too. He explained how the guilt manifested in different ways over the years. In his 20s, during his prime with the Bulls, he pushed himself to physical extremes. Played through injuries that should have sidelined him, practiced when he should have rested. It wasn't just about winning, it was about proving his survival was worthwhile. I remember the 1997 finals, Game 5 in Utah, Michael said. I had terrible food poisoning. Aunt could barely stand. Everyone told me to sit out, but I couldn't. Because somewhere in my mind, I was thinking, Jimmy never got to play another game. How can I sit out because of a stomachache? He scored 38 points in that game, a performance forever known as the flu game. People called it heroic. Michael called it penance. The guilt also drove his philanthropy, though most of it remained hidden. The James Parker Memorial Fund was just one part. Michael donated millions to other causes, always anonymously, always quietly. He built basketball courts in poor neighborhoods, funded scholarships for kids who'd lost parents, supported youth programs across America. I couldn't help Jimmy, Michael said, but I could help other kids. Every time I wrote a check, every time I funded a program, I was trying to balance the scale. It's trying to make my survival worth something. In the late 1990s, Michael's marriage to Juanita began to struggle. The pressure of being Michael Jordan, the icon, the brand, the expectation, was crushing. He wasn't sleeping well. He was irritable. He felt empty despite unprecedented success. That's when Juanita insisted I see someone, Michael said. A therapist. I resisted for months. Jordan men don't do therapy, you know. We handle things ourselves. But I was falling apart inside. So I finally went. Dr. Patricia Chen, a sports psychologist based in Chicago, specialized in trauma and loss. Over 3 years of sessions, she helped Michael understand that he was experiencing classic survivor's guilt. That his mother's decision to keep him home wasn't wrong, it was random chance. That Jimmy's death wasn't his fault or his responsibility. Doctor, and Chen asked me a question that changed everything, Michael said. She asked, if Jimmy had survived and you had died, what would you want Jimmy to do? I said immediately, I'd want him to live fully, to be happy, to not feel guilty. She said, then why aren't you giving yourself the same grace? That question broke through decades of psychological defense. Michael began to understand that guilt wasn't honoring Jimmy. Living well was honoring Jimmy. Making a positive impact was honoring Jimmy. The secret fund, the anonymous donations, the kept promise. Those were acts of love, not guilt. But intellectual understanding and emotional healing are different things. Michael continued to struggle, especially around the anniversary of Jimmy's death every April. Even after therapy, even after understanding it wasn't my fault, and I still felt this weight, Michael said. Like I was carrying Jimmy with me everywhere. In every game, every decision, every moment. Then came 2019. Meeting Darius changed everything. When I looked at Darius, I saw Jimmy, Michael said, his voice full of emotion. Same eyes, same smile, same gentle kindness. But more than that, I saw proof that Jimmy's life mattered, that death hadn't erased him. His grandson was alive, thriving, helping others, continuing Jimmy's legacy. He described the conversation at the restaurant when Darius told him that guilt wasn't love. How those words from a 24-year-old teacher helped him see 40 years of his life differently. Darius said, "My grandfather didn't die so you could feel guilty," Michael repeated. That sentence freed me. For the first time since 1979, I felt like maybe I didn't have to carry this weight anymore. Maybe keeping the promise was enough. Maybe living a good life was enough. Michael stood and walked to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box, similar to the one Rosalind had shown Marcus, but older, more worn. "This is the original letter," Michael said quietly. "I've kept it with me for 45 years. It's been in every home I've lived in, every locker room, every hotel room during away games. I've read it thousands of times." He opened the box carefully and removed a plastic sleeve protecting 2 pages of yellowed paper, handwritten in blue ink. Jimmy Parker's handwriting, neat, deliberate, full of hope. "I've never shown this to anyone outside my immediate family," Michael said, "but I want you to read it, because this letter is the reason for everything. This is what I've been trying to live up to for 45 years. He handed the letter to Marcus, who handled it with reverent care. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. Marcus read silently, absorbing Jimmy's teenage wisdom, his encouragement, his dreams. The letter was exactly as Rosalind had described, thoughtful, kind, prescient. But seeing the actual document, knowing it had been written by an 18-year-old boy days before his death, made it almost unbearably poignant. The final paragraph resonated deeply. Be great on the court, but be greater off it. Make people's lives better. That's the real championship. Marcus looked up, his own eyes wet. This is remarkable. He was so young, but so wise. That's Jimmy, Michael said simply. He understood things most people never figure out in a full lifetime. And he died before he could live his own advice. Marcus carefully returned the letter to its protective sleeve and handed it back to Michael. The weight of holding something so precious, so intimately connected to decades of hidden history, left him momentarily speechless. Michael placed the letter back in the wooden box with practiced care, the gesture of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. He sat down heavily, as if the act of sharing the letter had drained something from him. That letter saved my life, Michael said. Not immediately, not all at once, but over time, whenever I felt lost or angry or ready to quit, I'd read Jimmy's words. They'd pull me back. He described specific moments when the letter had guided him. During his sophomore year at North Carolina, when homesickness and the pressure of expectations made him consider transferring. During his early years with the Bulls, when losing season after losing season made him question if he'd ever win a championship. During his first retirement in 1993, when his father's murder left him devastated and directionless. Every time I'd read the letter, Michael said, and I'd hear Jimmy's voice telling me to keep going, to remember what matters, to be greater off the court than on it. Marcus asked, when did you decide to show me this? To go public with the story? Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Honestly, I never wanted to. For 45 years, I've kept this private because it felt sacred. Jimmy's letter wasn't meant for the world, it was meant for me. The fund, the donations, all of it. I did it because it was right, not because I wanted recognition. But Darius had changed his perspective. The young man's letter in October 2023 had forced Michael to consider something he'd never thought about. Maybe the story could help others. Darius wrote that kids in Englewood need hope, Michael said. They need to see that tragedy doesn't have to define you. That keeping promises matters. That love survives death. He said my story, our story, Jimmy's and mine, could show people what real greatness looks like. Michael had wrestled with the decision for weeks. He'd talked to his children about it. He'd talked to his therapist. He'd driven to Wilmington and stood at Jimmy's grave, having a one-sided conversation with a friend dead for 45 years. In the end, I asked myself what Jimmy would want, Michael said. And I knew. He'd want his name remembered. He'd want his life to mean something beyond just the people who knew him. He'd want his story to help someone, somewhere, feel less alone. That's what made Michael finally agree. Not for his own legacy, that was already secure, but for Jimmy's legacy, for Darius, for every kid who'd lost someone and wondered if their pain would ever mean anything. There's something else, Michael said, his voice growing quieter. I'm 61 years old. I won't live forever. When I'm gone, what happens to Jimmy's story? Who remembers him? Who tells his grandson and great-grandchildren about the boy who changed Michael Jordan's life? He'd realized that by keeping the secret, he was ensuring that Jimmy would be forgotten. But by telling the truth, Jimmy's kindness would be preserved. His letter, his wisdom, and his impact, all of it would survive. So, yes, I'm ready, Michael said firmly. I'm ready for people to know. I'm ready to be vulnerable in a way I've never been before. Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about honoring a promise I made when I was 15 years old. Marcus asked about the practical implications. What happens after my article publishes? Have you thought about that? Michael nodded. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. There will be interviews, documentaries, people asking for details. My privacy, which I've guarded fiercely, will be invaded in new ways. People will analyze my motivations, question my choices, maybe even criticize me for keeping it secret so long. But he was prepared for that, because the alternative, keeping Jimmy's story hidden forever, was worse. I want to do one more thing, Michael said. Something public, permanent. I want to rename the Englewood Youth Center, call it the James Parker Youth Center. Put up a plaque with his photograph and part of his letter. Make sure every kid who walks through those doors knows who Jimmy was and what he stood for. The dedication would happen in January 2024 on what would have been Jimmy's 63rd birthday. Michael would attend personally, not in disguise, not anonymously. He'd stand in front of cameras and reporters and tell Jimmy's story himself. I want Darius there, Michael said. I want Mrs. Parker's surviving family there. I want people from Wilmington who knew Jimmy. I want this to be a celebration of his life, not a Michael Jordan press conference. Marcus could see the determination in Michael's eyes. This wasn't a publicity stunt or image rehabilitation. This was a man finally unburdening himself of a secret that had shaped his entire adult life. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said carefully. That's why you're here. Do you think you would have become Michael Jordan? The Michael Jordan everyone knows. If Jimmy had lived? If that accident had never happened? Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I don't know, he finally said. Maybe I would have been a good player, maybe even great. But the drive, the obsession, or the refusal to accept anything less than perfection? That came from loss. That came from guilt. That came from feeling like I had to justify my survival. He paused, then continued. Part of me wishes I could trade it all, the championships, the fame, everything, to have Jimmy back. To see what he would have become. To watch him teach kids, coach them, change their lives the way he changed mine. But I can't make that trade. So instead, I've tried to live in a way that honors him. Marcus asked about the fund's future. Will you continue the donations? Absolutely, for as long as I live and beyond. I've set up my estate so that the James Parker Memorial Fund continues after my death. It'll be managed by Rosalind and eventually by Darius if he wants that responsibility. Jimmy's legacy will outlive me. The fund currently supported not just the Inglewood Center, but programs in 6 other cities: Charlotte, Wilmington, New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Detroit. Michael planned to expand it further, using his wealth to help thousands more kids find hope through basketball and mentorship. "I've been blessed with more money than I could ever spend," Michael said. "What good is it if I don't use it to make a difference?" That's what Jimmy would have done. He would have helped everyone he could. They talked for another hour. Michael shared more stories about Jimmy, small moments that hadn't come up in Rosalind's account. The time Jimmy taught him how to tie his sneakers properly for better ankle support. The afternoon they spent at the library researching colleges with good basketball programs. The conversation about girls and dating and growing up. "He was my big brother in every way that mattered," Michael said. "I had biological brothers and I loved them, but Jimmy chose me. He didn't have to spend his time with a 14-year-old kid. He did it because he saw something worth nurturing. That's a gift I can never repay." As their conversation wound down, Michael stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner of his office. He pulled out a basketball, old, worn, the leather cracked with age. "This was Jimmy's basketball," Michael said, holding it carefully. "His grandmother gave it to me after the funeral. I've kept it all these years. Never played with it again. Just kept it as a reminder." The ball had Jimmy's initials written in faded marker, JP. "When the James Parker Youth Center opens," Michael said, "I'm going to donate this basketball. Put it in a display case so kids can see it. A tangible connection to the boy who started all of this." Marcus felt the emotional weight of everything he'd learned over the past 2 days. This wasn't just a story about charity or celebrity generosity. This was a story about love, loss, guilt, redemption, and the ways we honor the people who save us. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Marcus said. "I'll do everything I can to tell it right, to make sure people understand what Jimmy meant to you and what you've done to keep his memory alive." Michael extended his hand. "I know you will. Rosalind wouldn't have brought you here otherwise. Just remember, this story isn't really about me. It's about a kid from Wilmington who died too young, but whose kindness changed the world. That's the headline. That's what matters." As Marcus prepared to leave, Michael stopped him. "One more thing. In your article, include this. Any donations people want to make in Jimmy's honor should go to the James Parker Memorial Fund. Not to me, not for recognition. Just to help more kids. That's what Jimmy would want." Marcus nodded, making a note. "And tell people Jimmy's last words to me," Michael added. "Tell them he said, 'Don't be late.' Because I wasn't late. I showed up every single day for 45 years. I kept the promise, and I'm not stopping now." January 21st, 2024. The morning dawned cold and clear over Chicago, winter sunlight casting long shadows across the south side. Marcus Webb stood outside the Inglewood Youth Center at 815 West 63rd Street, watching workers hang a new sign above the entrance. James Parker Youth Center. The dedication ceremony would begin at noon. Already by 10 o'clock, people were gathering. Community members, former students of the center, reporters, camera crews. Word had spread quickly after Marcus's article published in the Charlotte Observer 3 days earlier. The story had exploded across every news platform. ESPN ran special segments. The New York Times picked it up. Social media erupted with reactions: shock, tears, admiration. People couldn't believe Michael Jordan had kept such a profound secret for 45 years. But the response that mattered most came from Inglewood itself. Kids who'd grown up at the center, now adults, shared their own stories. A teacher in Atlanta who'd received sneakers through the anonymous fund. A college student in Los Angeles who'd attended a summer camp paid for by mysterious donations. A single mother in Houston whose son got a scholarship she later traced to the James Parker Memorial Fund. Hundreds of lives touched, thousands of moments of kindness, all stemming from one teenage boy's impact on another teenage boy in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1977. Marcus watched a van pull up. Michael Jordan stepped out. He dressed simply in dark pants and a black overcoat. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a man returning to a place that had quietly received his devotion for decades. Roslyn arrived minutes later with several members of the Parker family. Jimmy's cousins, second cousins, and extended relatives who'd traveled from North Carolina. They carried photographs of Jimmy, his high school yearbook, a jersey from Laney High School that had been preserved for 45 years. Then Darius Parker arrived, wearing a suit, looking nervous and proud. His grandmother Teresa was with him, along with his mother. 3 generations connected by Jimmy's brief life. Inside the center's gymnasium, chairs had been set up for about 200 people. The room filled quickly. Patricia Monroe, the center's director, stood near the front, wiping tears from her eyes. She'd run this facility for 15 years, never knowing the full story behind the donations that kept them afloat. At noon exactly, the ceremony began. Patricia spoke first, describing the center's history and its mission. She talked about the thousands of kids who'd found safety, purpose, and hope within these walls. "We always knew we had a guardian angel," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "Someone who believed in these kids when the world had written them off. Today, we finally get to say, thank you." Next, Roslyn Jordan approached the podium. She spoke about her brother, but more importantly, she spoke about Jimmy Parker. She described the summer of 1977, the friendship that changed everything, the accident that took Jimmy's life, and the promise that followed. "My brother has won 6 NBA championships," Roslyn said. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's considered the greatest basketball player of all time. But his greatest achievement isn't any of those things. His greatest achievement is keeping a promise to a friend for 45 years. That's real greatness. The audience sat in complete silence, many crying openly. Then Darius stood to speak. He walked to the podium slowly, carrying notes he'd written and rewritten dozens of times. But when he got there, he set the notes aside and spoke from his heart. "I never met my grandfather," Darius began. "He died 7 months before my father was born. For most of my life, I didn't even know his name. I grew up thinking I came from nowhere, that I had no legacy, no history worth knowing." He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "But 3 years ago, I learned the truth, and I learned that my grandfather was James Parker. I learned that he was kind, talented, and wise beyond his years. I learned that he changed the life of a boy who became Michael Jordan. And I learned that everything good in my life, the basketball skills I thought were random, the help I received at this center, the opportunities I've been given, all of it traces back to my grandfather's kindness." Darius looked directly at Michael, who sat in the front row. "Mr. Jordan didn't have to remember my grandfather. He didn't have to keep his promise. He didn't have to spend millions of dollars helping kids like me. He did it because love is stronger than death. Because promises matter. Because my grandfather planted a seed that grew into something beautiful." The audience erupted in applause. Darius wiped his eyes and continued. "This center is being renamed for James Parker today. But really, it's always been his. Every kid who walked through these doors, every basketball that bounced on this court, every dream that started in this building, all of it is my grandfather's legacy. He's been here all along, in the generosity of a man who never forgot him." Darius stepped away from the podium, and Michael Jordan stood. The room fell silent again. People pulled out phones to record. Reporters leaned forward. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Michael walked to the front slowly, his hands in his pockets, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. He stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd, at the kids from Englewood, at the Parker family, at Darius. "I'm not good at this," Michael said simply. "Talking about feelings. I'm being open about things that hurt. I've spent my whole life keeping things private, controlling my image, showing only what I wanted people to see." He took a breath. "But Jimmy Parker deserves more than my privacy. He deserves to be remembered. He deserves the world to know his name and what he stood for." Michael told the story again, in his own words. The outdoor court in Wilmington, the summer of practice, getting cut from the team, Jimmy's refusal to let him quit. The promise to practice together every single day. The accident, the funeral, the letter. Jimmy wrote me a letter before he died, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He told me to be great on the court, but greater off it. He told me that making people's lives better was the real championship. I've tried to live up to those words for 45 years. He explained the fund, the donations, the decades of anonymous giving. He talked about meeting Darius and discovering that Jimmy's bloodline had survived. He talked about what it meant to keep a promise across nearly half a century. People call me the greatest basketball player ever, Michael said. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But I'll tell you what I'm most proud of. I showed up. Jimmy told me not to be late, and I wasn't. I showed up every single day. I kept my promise. And I'm not stopping. The audience stood and applauded. Michael raised his hand to quiet them. This isn't about me, he said firmly. This is about a boy named James Parker who died at 18 years old, who never got to go to college, never got to become a teacher, never got to help all the kids he dreamed of helping. But his kindness survived. It survived in me. It survived in this center. And it survived in his grandson, who's now helping kids just like Jimmy wanted to. Michael gestured to the back of the gymnasium where workers had installed a large bronze plaque. It featured Jimmy's senior portrait from Laney High School and an engraved excerpt from his letter. Be great on the court, but be greater off it. Make people's lives better, that's the real championship. Every kid who comes here will see Jimmy's face, Michael said. Every kid will read his words. And maybe, just maybe, some of them will be inspired to keep their own promises, to honor the people who helped them, to turn pain into purpose. After the speeches, everyone moved outside for the official unveiling of the new sign. A purple cloth covered the entrance. Michael and Darius stood on either side, their hands on the rope that would pull the cloth away. On three, Patricia Monroe said. 1, 2, 3. The cloth fell away, revealing the new name in bold letters. James Parker, Youth Center. Below it, in smaller text, in memory of James Parker, 1961 to 1979. His kindness echoes through generations. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. But Michael wasn't looking at the sign. He was looking at Darius, who was crying and smiling at the same time. They embraced, and in that moment, 45 years of grief and love and promise-keeping came together. After the ceremony, Michael did something unprecedented. He stayed for 3 hours, talking to kids at the center, shooting baskets in the gym, answering questions. He wasn't Michael Jordan the icon, and he was just Mike, the way Jimmy used to call him. A 10-year-old girl named Amara asked him, "Mr. Jordan, were you scared when your friend died?" Michael knelt down to her level. "Yes, I was terrified. I thought I'd never be happy again." "But you were happy again?" Amara asked. "Yes, it took time, but yes. And you know what helped? Keeping my promise to him, helping other people, turning my sadness into something good." He smiled at her. "You remember that, okay? When bad things happen, you can turn them into something beautiful." Marcus watched this interaction from across the gym, taking notes. This was the real story, not the millions donated or the secret kept, but the ripple effects of one boy's kindness spreading across decades. As the afternoon turned to evening, Michael prepared to leave. He stood one last time in front of Jimmy's plaque, touching the bronze surface gently. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I hope I made you proud." Darius joined him, placing his own hand on the plaque beside Michael's. "He is proud. I know he is." They stood there together, Michael Jordan and Jimmy Parker's grandson, united by love, loss, and the unbreakable power of promises kept. Marcus published his follow-up article the next day describing the dedication ceremony. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, the James Parker Memorial Fund received over $2 million in donations from people around the world who were moved by the story. Michael announced that every dollar would go toward expanding the fund's reach, helping more kids in more cities. The fund would now operate in 15 cities instead of 7, he is touching thousands more lives. Schools began teaching Jimmy's story in character education classes. His letter became a viral sensation, shared millions of times on social media. Young people created artwork inspired by his words. Athletes spoke about what the story meant to them. James Parker, who died forgotten except by a small circle of family and friends, became a symbol of how one person's kindness can change the world. And Michael Jordan, who'd spent 45 years hiding his greatest achievement, finally understood what Jimmy had meant in his letter. The real championship wasn't the trophies or the fame. It was this: love surviving death, promises kept across decades, and a grandson who would carry his grandfather's legacy forward. On the evening of January 21st, 2024, Michael sat in his hotel room in Chicago and wrote a letter of his own. Not to anyone living, but to Jimmy. Dear Jimmy, I finally told them. I told the world about you, about what you meant to me, about the promise I made. Your name is on a building now. Your face is on a plaque. Your words are inspiring people you'll never meet. I kept my promise. I showed up. I wasn't late. I love you, brother. Always have, always will. Thank you for saving me. Mike. He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and the next morning drove to Oakdale Cemetery in Wilmington. He placed the letter on Jimmy's grave, weighed it down with a small rock. Then Michael Jordan walked away, lighter than he'd felt in 45 years. The secret was out. The promise was fulfilled, and Jimmy Parker's legacy would live forever. But that was the end of this incredible story about Michael Jordan and Jimmy Parker. A story of friendship, loss, and a promise kept for 45 years. We'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring, true stories like this one. We share incredible tales of kindness, courage, and the human spirit that deserve to be heard. And here's the most important part: share this video with your friends and family. Help us spread Jimmy Parker's message that being great off the court matters more than any championship. Let's spread kindness and awareness together, one story at a time. Thank you for listening. Remember, keep your promises, help others, and never forget the people who changed your life. Until next time.